The sun had just started rising over the highway when the lorry driver climbed into his big truck, yawning and stretching. The sky was still painted with soft shades of pink and orange, a calm morning that promised nothing of the chaos ahead. He had been driving for years, and mornings like this were routine. His life wasn't flashy, and he never sought attention, but he took pride in doing his job well. Today, like every other day, he carried a heavy load of goods across towns, making sure that stores and homes received what they needed. He paused for a moment outside the truck, taking a deep breath. The air was crisp and the highway was nearly empty. He liked these quiet moments before the engine roared to life. His mind wandered to his family who were still sleeping at home. He thought about how much he wanted to provide them with a better life, maybe a house with a yard where his children could play freely. But dreams like that didn't come overnight. They were built slowly, one long day at a time, 1 mile after another. He started the engine and the truck rumbled awake like a giant animal stretching after a long sleep. He checked the mirrors, secured the cargo, and slowly merged onto the highway. The roads were mostly empty, and he enjoyed the rhythm of driving. The landscape rolled past him, fields on one side, patches of forest on the other. Birds were still chirping and the world seemed peaceful, but peace can be deceptive. By mid-morning, the sky began to change. Dark clouds crept in, forming patterns that made the air feel heavy. He noticed the wind picking up, rustling the trees along the roadside. A chill ran down his spine, but he shrugged it off. Weather was unpredictable, and he had driven through storms before. He turned on the radio, hoping for some news or traffic updates, but all that played was the low hum of music and advertisements. No warnings yet. As he continued driving, he noticed other vehicles moving faster than usual, people clearly anxious about the darkening sky. Small bits of debris began swirling on the road, leaves and dust catching the wind in strange patterns. The lorry driver tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his eyes scanning for any danger. Even as a professional, he knew that storms could be unpredictable, especially when nature decided to show its power. Suddenly, the radio crackled with a weather alert. A tornado warning had been issued for the area. The lorry driver's heart skipped a beat. Tornadoes were rare, but when they happened, they could be deadly. People were told to evacuate immediately, to find shelter and stay away from highways. But he had miles to go before he could reach safety. His cargo was important, and delays could cause serious trouble for businesses depending on him. He couldn't just stop, even though a part of him wanted to pull over and hide. He slowed the truck slightly, keeping an eye on the horizon. The clouds were moving fast now, swirling like a dark whirlpool. The wind grew stronger, tugging at the truck and making it sway slightly. Debris hit the windshield and he switched on the wipers to keep his vision clear. Every instinct in his body told him to be careful, but he was trained to stay calm, to think quickly and to act decisively. A few miles ahead, he noticed a car stranded on the roadside. It was stopped in a dangerous place, and from the distance he could see a family inside, panicked and unsure what to do. The lorry driver's stomach tightened. He didn't know them, and he had no obligation beyond delivering his cargo. Yet he couldn't just drive past. Something in him shifted, a deep sense of responsibility and empathy. He slowed the truck and pulled over carefully, putting on his hazard lights. He approached the car, and the family inside looked terrified. A mother clutched her child, tears streaking her face. A father tried to calm everyone, but his voice trembled with fear. The wind roared around them, stronger with each passing second. The lorry driver took a deep breath, speaking calmly. "You need to get out of here. I can help you get to a safer spot." The family hesitated, unsure if it was safe to trust a stranger, but desperation outweighed caution. The lorry driver guided them carefully, helping them into a sheltered area beside his truck. His hands were steady, his voice reassuring. In moments like this, there was no time for hesitation. People needed action, and he knew it. The wind picked up even more, and the sky turned a deep gray. Twigs and small branches flew through the air like missiles. The lorry driver quickly assessed the situation. The family's car was too small to protect them from the debris, but his truck, with its massive frame and sturdy structure, could provide some safety. He moved it into a position that would shield them as best as possible, and told them to stay low inside the cabin while he checked the surrounding area for other stranded people. As he scanned the road, he noticed another vehicle struggling against the wind, nearly being pushed off the asphalt. Without thinking twice, he ran toward it, his own safety secondary to the lives around him. He opened the door and helped the occupants, guiding them toward the relative safety of his truck. Fear was everywhere, but so was trust. People instinctively relied on him, sensing his calm and steady presence. Even as the tornado approached, the lorry driver remained focused. He was aware of the danger, of course, but he refused to let panic take control. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated to protect as many lives as possible. He spoke softly to those around him, offering words of comfort, telling them to stay calm, to breathe. It wasn't just about physical protection. It was about giving them hope in a hopeless moment. The roar of the tornado grew louder, a terrifying sound like a freight train barreling through the sky. Trees bent and snapped. Debris flew in all directions and the ground trembled beneath the force. The lorry driver felt the truck shake, but he stayed at the wheel, ensuring everyone stayed close and low. His heart pounded, but his mind remained clear. Panic was contagious, but he refused to let it spread. Amid the chaos, he noticed something remarkable. Strangers who had been hesitant to trust him now followed his instructions without question. People helped each other, guided by the calm authority of this one man. A mother held her child while helping a neighbor find a better position. A father assisted another woman in securing her belongings. The lorry driver watched quietly, realizing that even in the worst of situations, humans could come together and act with compassion. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Minutes felt like hours. The tornado moved unpredictably, forcing the lorry driver to adjust constantly. He repositioned the truck, checked on the family, and made sure no one had wandered into danger. His muscles ached and the wind cut through his jacket, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Every second mattered, and he knew it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the worst of the storm began to pass. The winds subsided slightly, and the swirling debris started to settle. The lorry driver helped the people he had rescued take stock of their situation. Miraculously, everyone was alive, shaken but safe. Tears were shed not just from fear but from relief. People hugged each other, and some even turned to him with gratitude that words could not fully express. He looked around at the scene. The highway was scattered with debris, trees were broken, and vehicles damaged. Yet in the midst of destruction there was life. People were safe because of quick thinking, courage, and a refusal to give in to fear. The lorry driver stood quietly, watching the sunrise now breaking through the clouds. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He had only done what felt right. The first part of his story ended not with recognition, but with a sense of purpose. He had faced the storm and protected strangers not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Little did he know, the people he had helped included someone with influence, someone whose gratitude would echo far beyond this highway. But for now, he remained humble, focused on the next step, and ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. Even in moments of terror, the lorry driver proved that courage isn't loud. It doesn't always come with medals or applause. Sometimes it comes in the quiet determination to help, to protect, and to stand firm when everything around you is falling apart. And that quiet courage would soon change more than just the lives of the strangers on the highway. It would ripple out in ways he could never imagine. The tornado had passed, but the world it left behind was unrecognizable. The highway, which had once seemed so ordinary, was now strewn with broken branches, scattered debris, and overturned vehicles. The lorry driver stepped out carefully, his boots crunching over shards of wood and glass. The air still carried the sharp electric smell of the storm, mixed with dust and leaves. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. There was no time to pause for relief or reflection. People were still out there needing help, and he was determined to find them. He glanced toward the family he had first rescued. They were huddled together near his truck, shivering and frightened but alive. Their gratitude was evident, but he waved it off with a quiet nod. Recognition had never been his goal. His focus remained on ensuring no one else was left in danger. He scanned the road ahead. Twisted metal glinted under the sun, breaking through the dark clouds, and a few vehicles were trapped in the wreckage. Some were still occupied, people too stunned or afraid to move on their own. Without hesitation, he began moving toward the nearest car that appeared to be in trouble. A small sedan was wedged between a fallen tree and a guardrail, smoke rising gently from the engine. The driver inside looked pale and dazed. The lorry driver approached carefully, assessing the situation. The doors were jammed and the storm had left the vehicle dangerously unstable. He spoke calmly through the window, trying to reassure the occupant. "It's okay. I'm here to help. Just stay calm and follow my instructions." With a combination of strength, skill, and patience, he managed to pry the door open and guide the person out. The driver was trembling but unharmed, and as they reached the safety of the lorry's side, they clasped his hands in relief. He simply nodded and helped them steady themselves. One by one, he moved through the wreckage, helping people from their damaged cars and guiding them to safer areas. There was no pause, no hesitation, just continuous action fueled by instinct and compassion. While helping, he noticed the small details that often went unnoticed in moments of crisis. A child clutched a stuffed toy, unwilling to let go even as tears streamed down their face. An elderly woman leaned on a stranger for support, her legs weak from fear. The lorry driver addressed each person with patience, offering comfort with simple words. "You're safe now," he said. "I've got you. Just stay close to me." His voice carried a weight of calm that helped people steady themselves amidst the lingering chaos. At one point, he spotted another vehicle further down the highway. It had been flipped onto its side, its occupants trapped inside. The sight made his stomach tighten, but there was no time to be afraid. He ran toward the overturned car, dodging debris as the wind still whispered through the damaged trees. A man and a woman were inside calling out for help. The lorry driver shouted back, letting them know he was coming. Using all his strength, he managed to open a door just enough to help them climb out. They fell into his arms briefly, breathless and shaking, and he steadied them, guiding them toward the safety of the truck's trailer. Even as he worked, he remained aware of the dangers around him. The storm had caused power lines to fall, and some poles were unstable. Twisted metal and broken glass covered the highway, ready to cut or trip anyone who moved carelessly. Yet he moved deliberately, calculating each step. He knew that panicking would only make the situation worse. His calm presence was contagious. Strangers watched him and followed his instructions, helping each other under his guidance. What had started as a single act of bravery now became a coordinated effort. Time seemed suspended. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, but the devastation made it hard to measure the passing hours. The lorry driver noticed a faint sound, a cry for help that stood out even amid the lingering wind. He turned sharply, spotting a small group trapped near the edge of the highway. Among them was a man who seemed unusually composed, observing the chaos rather than panicking. The lorry driver didn't know it yet, but this calm stranger would later reveal himself to be someone very important. For now, he was simply another person in need of help, and the driver's focus was on getting everyone to safety. The lorry driver approached quickly, extending his hands and speaking reassuringly. "I can get you out of here. Just follow me." He guided the group carefully, navigating around jagged debris and unstable ground. Children clung to him for support, and adults followed, trusting his instincts. Step by step, they moved closer to the relative safety of the truck's trailer. The storm's aftermath was terrifying, but in that moment, there was also hope, a fragile hope anchored in action, trust and human connection. As they reached the trailer, the lorry driver paused briefly to catch his breath. His arms ached, his clothes were torn, and his hair was damp with sweat and rain. Yet he didn't stop to rest. People needed him. The group he had just rescued looked at him with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. He offered water from his supplies, gave blankets to those shivering, and checked everyone for injuries. Miraculously, none had been seriously hurt. The lorry driver allowed himself a small sigh of relief. In a situation where so much could have gone wrong, everyone had survived. Even after this, there was no time for celebration. Emergency services were still on their way, but the driver knew that waiting could put people at further risk. The highway was still unstable, and debris could shift at any moment. He continued to organize the survivors, helping them move toward safer spots and ensuring they were accounted for. His actions were methodical, driven by a sense of responsibility that went beyond simple duty. For him, every life mattered equally, and he treated each person with the same care and urgency. At one point, he glanced at the man who had been observing calmly. The man had helped others without hesitation, but he had not sought the spotlight. He had moved quietly, assisting the elderly and children, showing a presence of mind that was unusual in such chaos. The lorry driver noticed it, but didn't ask questions. Identification didn't matter now. What mattered was saving lives. Little did he know, This man was someone whose influence extended far beyond the highway, someone whose gratitude would later carry weight across the nation. As the hours passed, the highway slowly began to empty. People were guided to safer areas, trucks and cars were stabilized, and debris was cleared enough for emergency vehicles to reach the scene. The lorry driver moved tirelessly among the survivors, offering reassurance, comfort, and guidance. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't care about headlines or applause. His focus remained steadfast: protect the vulnerable, guide the frightened, and ensure that everyone could make it through. By late afternoon, the lorry driver finally allowed himself a brief pause. He leaned against his truck, exhausted but alert. Around him, the survivors were beginning to process what had happened. Some hugged each other tightly, tears mixing relief with fear. Children clung to parents, seeking comfort after a morning of terror. The lorry driver watched quietly, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had done what he could, and for now it had been enough. The storm had tested him in ways that words could not describe. It had forced him to act instinctively, to trust his skills, and to put others' safety above his own. And in doing so, he had shown something rare: that courage doesn't always come from those in power or fame. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people who choose to act when it matters most. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the highway. Emergency vehicles were finally arriving, lights flashing and sirens wailing, taking over the task of moving people to safety. The lorry driver stepped aside, letting the professionals handle what remained. He watched as survivors were assisted onto ambulances, buses, and other vehicles that would take them home or to shelters. His heart felt heavy with exhaustion but light with relief. Everyone was alive. As the chaos slowly settled into order, the calm stranger approached him. Quietly, without fanfare, the man shook his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The lorry driver nodded, brushing it off. "I just did what anyone would do," he replied. But the stranger's gaze held something different, something the driver didn't recognize yet. A quiet respect not for the driver's skill or strength, but for his heart, his willingness to act without hesitation. The day was ending, and the lorry driver finally allowed himself a moment to breathe fully. The sky, once dark and terrifying, was now painted with hues of pink and gold. Birds began to return to the trees, and the wind had calmed to a gentle breeze. For the first time in hours, he could feel a small sense of peace. He had faced the storm, saved lives, and kept people safe. And yet, he had no idea that the person he had helped so quietly would later become an important connection in a story far bigger than this highway. For now, he simply packed up his supplies, checked his truck, and prepared to continue his journey. The tornado had passed, but its mark remained, on the highway, on the people he had helped, and on him. The lorry driver's courage had been tested, and he had passed not because he sought recognition, but because he simply could not ignore the call to help. Even in the quiet after the storm, the impact of his actions was clear. Strangers had survived because of one man's determination, skill, and empathy. And though he did not yet know it, the story of his bravery was only beginning to unfold. A story that would reach far beyond the highway, beyond the storm, and into places where courage was celebrated in ways he could never imagine. Even as the highway began to clear and emergency services took over, the lorry driver couldn't shake the feeling that the worst wasn't over. The tornado had passed, but the damage it left behind was still dangerous. Broken trees, scattered debris, and weakened power lines littered the roads. Small fires had started in some areas, likely caused by broken electrical connections. The lorry driver knew he had to act quickly if more lives were to be saved. He refused to sit back and wait for help to arrive. The people around him needed someone to guide them. He scanned the horizon and noticed a small group stranded near the edge of the road. A few cars had been abandoned, their owners frozen in shock. Among them were children, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, and an elderly couple leaning on each other for support. He jogged toward them, shouting over the gusts of wind to make sure they could hear him. "This way. Come me. With me. You'll be safe with my truck." The group hesitated for a moment, uncertainty clear in their eyes. Panic had made their movements slow and awkward, but the calm authority in the lorry driver's voice seemed to anchor them. One by one, they started moving toward him, holding hands, following his lead. He instructed them to stay low, to avoid flying debris, and to move steadily. His words were simple but firm, each one carrying reassurance that they clung to. As they reached the relative safety of the truck, he quickly scanned each person for injuries. One child had a scraped knee, and he immediately offered a cloth from his supplies to clean and cover the wound. An older man was shivering violently, so he handed him a jacket from the truck and guided him to sit on a stable platform inside the trailer. The lorry driver knew that physical comfort was only part of what people needed. Emotional reassurance was equally important. He spoke softly, sharing encouragement and reminders that they had made it through the worst. While tending to the group, he noticed a man standing slightly apart, calm and composed even amidst the chaos. Unlike the others, this man didn't cling to anyone or show fear. Instead, he observed, offering small words of assistance to those nearby. The lorry driver didn't know who he was, but there was a quiet strength in him that stood out. He silently noted the man's composure, grateful for the unspoken support, and continued helping the rest. The wind continued to gust sporadically, reminding everyone that the danger wasn't completely gone. Twigs and small debris still flew across the road, and the occasional loud crack of breaking trees made everyone jump. But the lorry driver remained calm. He moved with purpose, guiding people to the most secure parts of the trailer, making sure the children were near adults they trusted, and ensuring everyone had water and blankets. His attention to detail was meticulous, yet everything he did appeared effortless. After making sure the immediate group was safe, he scanned the highway again. In the distance, a vehicle was trapped under a fallen tree, smoke rising from the engine. The driver inside was panicked, waving frantically for help. Without hesitation, the lorry driver sprinted toward the car, dodging flying debris and loose branches. The closer he got, the more dangerous it became. The fallen tree shifted slightly under the weight of the car, and he had to act quickly to prevent further harm. He reached the vehicle and assessed the situation. The doors were jammed and the windshield had shattered. He calmly instructed the occupants to remain still, while he pried the door open enough for them to crawl out. Two children clung tightly to their mother as he guided them toward the safety of his truck. The father followed, his face pale and hands trembling. The lorry driver gave each of them words of comfort, steadying their breathing, helping them focus on moving step by step. Once the family was safe, he returned to the truck and checked on the others. His energy was waning, but he refused to rest. There were still people stranded, and he knew the storm's aftermath could be unpredictable. A sudden shift in wind could send debris flying, or weakened trees could fall without warning. He remained alert, scanning constantly for anyone else in need. Amid this, the calm man who had been observing quietly approached him. "You've done an incredible job," he said, his voice measured but sincere. The lorry driver nodded without much reaction. "I'm just doing what I can," he replied. There was no need for praise. Recognition wasn't why he acted. But the man's presence was reassuring, a silent acknowledgement that he wasn't alone in helping others. The lorry driver then noticed a child crying, separated from their parents and sitting alone near the road. He quickly went over, kneeling to meet the child's eyes. "Hey there, it's okay," he said gently. "I'm here now. You're safe." The child hesitated for a moment, then ran into his arms. He held the child close, calming their sobs and carefully guided them to their parents, who were overwhelmed with relief. Moments like these reinforced why he didn't hesitate to put himself in danger. The simplest acts, comforting a child, lending a hand, giving instructions, could make the difference between panic and survival. As more survivors gathered around the truck, the lorry driver organized them carefully. He made sure the injured were closest to safety, that everyone had water and blankets, and that children were with adults they trusted. He also gave instructions to those who were able to move and assist, ensuring a coordinated effort. In the chaos, his calm demeanor became a stabilizing force, something people clung to without even realizing it. By mid-afternoon, the highway was starting to resemble a scene from a nightmare slowly coming to order. Emergency vehicles were approaching, but the lorry driver stayed with the group until they were officially accounted for. Paramedics and firefighters arrived to take over, and he handed over the rescued families one by one. Their gratitude was overwhelming, yet he stayed humble, refusing to linger for attention or praise. Even as the organized evacuation began, he noticed the calm man again. The stranger had quietly helped guide others, lifting debris and calming the frightened. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The lorry driver had no idea who this man really was, only that his composure and quiet help had made the rescue smoother and safer. It wasn't until later that he would learn the man's true identity and how much impact their brief interaction would have. The lorry driver then took a moment to survey the scene. The highway, though partially cleared, was still dangerous. Power lines hung low, vehicles were damaged, and debris still littered the road. He realized the cleanup wasn't just about moving people to safety. It was about making sure no one else would fall victim to the storm's aftermath. He organized volunteers, guiding able-bodied survivors to help with smaller tasks like moving debris, securing unstable cars, and assisting the elderly. During this time, the calm stranger approached him again, speaking softly. "You've saved many lives today. Not many would have done what you did." The lorry driver shook his head. "Anyone could have done the same," he said. "I just did what felt right." But inside he felt a quiet satisfaction. Despite the exhaustion, despite the chaos, he had acted with purpose, and people were alive because of it. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the damaged highway. The wind had calmed and the immediate danger had passed, but the memory of the storm's fury lingered in every broken branch, overturned car, and scared expression. The lorry driver finally allowed himself a brief pause, leaning against his truck, hands on his knees, taking deep breaths. His clothes were torn, his body was sore, and dirt covered his skin, but he had saved countless lives. That thought alone was enough to keep him going. He looked at the families he had rescued. Children clung to parents, faces streaked with tears, yet alive. Adults held each other, exhausted but safe. And the calm stranger who had quietly assisted wherever he could was still nearby, observing the scene. At that moment, the lorry driver realized something important. Courage wasn't always flashy. It wasn't always about recognition or medals. Sometimes it was about standing firm when others faltered, taking action when it mattered most, and helping without asking for anything in return. By early evening, emergency services had taken over completely. The highway was partially cleared, survivors were being transported to shelters, and the lorry driver finally allowed himself to sit down. Fatigue weighed heavily on him, but he felt a quiet pride. The day had been terrifying, exhausting, and dangerous, yet he had faced it head-on. He had helped strangers survive one of nature's most unpredictable forces, and he had done so without thinking of himself. As he rested, the calm man approached once more. This time he spoke with a note of gravity in his voice. "You've done more than you know today. Many lives were saved because of you. I hope you understand how rare that is." The lorry driver looked at him, puzzled but grateful. "I just did what anyone would do," he said again, brushing off the praise. But the stranger smiled knowingly, as if recognizing something the driver couldn't yet see. The lorry driver stayed for a few more minutes, helping organize any last survivors and ensuring that no one had been overlooked. Then, with a final glance at the highway, he climbed back into his truck. His body ached, his mind was tired, but he knew his work that day had made a difference. He started the engine and slowly began to drive away, the calm stranger watching him go. Unbeknownst to the driver, the man he had helped and who had helped others quietly was someone whose gratitude would later echo far beyond the highway, shaping events in ways he could not yet imagine. Even as night fell, the lorry driver reflected on the day's events. Courage, he realized, wasn't about recognition. It was about action, empathy, and the willingness to stand firm in the face of danger, and today he had lived that truth. The aftermath of the tornado left the highway in chaos, but the lorry driver did not stop working. Even as emergency vehicles arrived and began taking charge, he remained focused, ensuring that every person he had helped earlier was accounted for. Families, children, and the elderly were being guided to safety, and he quietly assisted the volunteers and emergency personnel in moving people to buses, ambulances, and shelters. He moved among the chaos calmly, directing those who were able-bodied to assist others while keeping a steady eye on the more vulnerable. The lorry driver had spent hours in the storm, pulling people from overturned vehicles, shielding them from flying debris, and keeping everyone calm. His body ached, his clothes were torn, and dirt covered him from head to toe, but exhaustion did not slow him. His mind was still sharp, alert to danger. He checked the highway repeatedly, making sure no one was left behind. Amid the debris and broken trees, he spotted a few people struggling to move through the wreckage. He hurried to help them, guiding them safely to the area near his truck. Among the rescued was the calm man who had stayed composed throughout the chaos. Until now, the driver had only seen him as a quiet, helpful presence. But as they walked toward a safe zone together, the man quietly spoke. "I have to tell you something," he said, his tone measured. "I'm grateful for what you've done today. Very few people act as bravely as you have." The lorry driver shook his head, brushing off the praise. "I just did what I had to do," he replied. His focus was still on others, not himself. The calm man looked around at the scene, observing the chaos with a keen eye. His expression was serious but composed, as though he understood the magnitude of what had occurred better than anyone else present. He spoke again, softly but with authority. "You don't realize it, but today you've saved more than lives. You've inspired hope in people who had none left." The lorry driver felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet satisfaction that came not from recognition, but from knowing he had made a difference. While the two of them moved among the survivors, the lorry driver noticed the small gestures that often go unnoticed during a disaster. Parents comforted their children, strangers helped strangers, and people who had been frightened moments earlier began to show courage in small ways. It wasn't just the driver's actions that had saved lives. It was the way he had inspired others to act, to step forward even when afraid. The quiet ripple of human kindness spread faster than the tornado itself, proving that courage can multiply when people see it modeled. Emergency personnel began arriving in greater numbers. Firefighters, paramedics, and police officers quickly took over much of the heavy lifting. The lorry driver worked alongside them, pointing out areas where people were still trapped or in danger. He helped move debris and assisted injured individuals until he was certain that no one had been overlooked. The sun had climbed high, casting harsh light over the destruction, but his focus did not waver. For him, there was no time to rest until every person was safe. It was during this moment of calm after the storm that the lorry driver finally had a chance to speak with some of the people he had saved. One woman, holding her child close, approached him, her voice trembling. "I don't even know your name," she said, tears in her eyes. "But you saved us. You saved my child." The driver smiled faintly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm glad you're safe. That's all that matters." It was a simple exchange, but in that moment, he felt the weight of what he had done. Every small act, every decision in the storm had mattered. The calm man stepped closer again, and this time he spoke more directly. "I want you to know who I am," he said. "I am someone who can't forget what you did today. You acted without hesitation, without thought for reward or recognition. That kind of courage is rare." The lorry driver raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The man finally revealed his identity. He was a U.S. senator in the region on a private visit, caught unexpectedly in the tornado. The revelation surprised the driver, but it didn't change the way he saw his own actions. He had saved lives because it was the right thing to do, not because of who the people were. The senator's presence added a new layer to the day. People around them began to notice, and soon whispers spread among the rescued families and volunteers. Some recognized the man from the news, and a sense of awe rippled through the crowd. Yet the driver remained humble. He did not seek attention or praise, and even with the senator standing beside him, he focused on ensuring that everyone remained safe and calm. As the emergency teams worked to transport people to shelters and medical facilities, the senator stayed close to the driver, observing his actions. He saw the way the lorry driver moved among the survivors, offering comfort, guidance, and reassurance. He noticed the calm authority that inspired others to help, and the patience he showed with frightened children and elderly survivors. The senator was deeply impressed by the driver's courage and humility, recognizing that true heroism often comes from ordinary people acting in extraordinary moments. After ensuring that everyone was accounted for, the lorry driver finally had a chance to sit down. He leaned against his truck, exhausted, watching as families were guided onto buses and ambulances. The highway was still littered with debris, but the immediate danger had passed. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light over the scene, giving a strange sense of calm after the chaos. He allowed himself a deep breath, his mind slowly processing the day's events. The senator approached him once more, speaking with sincerity. "What you've done today will not be forgotten," he said. "You didn't just save lives, you reminded everyone here what it means to care for others. You've set an example for people across the country, whether they know your name or not." The lorry driver shook his head modestly. "I didn't do it for that. I just did what I thought was right." But inside, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The knowledge that his actions mattered on such a scale gave him a subtle but powerful satisfaction. News crews began to arrive, capturing footage of the aftermath and the heroic efforts that had saved lives. Families recounted their experiences, praising the courage of the lorry driver who had guided them through the storm. Despite the attention, he remained calm and grounded, speaking simply and honestly. He emphasized that anyone could have acted similarly, and that the real lesson was the importance of helping others in times of need. His humility and sincerity resonated with viewers, making him an example of true heroism in action. The senator, still present, spoke to the media as well, carefully highlighting the driver's bravery. He explained how the driver had acted decisively, helping numerous people escape life-threatening danger without regard for his own safety. He also mentioned how the driver's calm presence had inspired others to act, showing that courage is contagious. The senator's acknowledgement ensured that the driver's story would reach a much wider audience, though the driver himself remained focused on the people in front of him, rather than the fame that followed. As the day drew to a close, volunteers and emergency workers began to clear the remaining debris, restoring order to the highway. The lorry driver helped coordinate these efforts, lending his experience and knowledge of the road to make the process safer and more efficient. He guided people in moving heavy objects, checking vehicles, and ensuring that no hazards remained. Even as darkness approached, he continued working, knowing that responsibility did not end with the storm's passing. Finally, with the survivors safe and the emergency teams in full control, the driver allowed himself a moment to reflect. He looked around at the highway, now quiet in the fading light. He thought about the people he had helped, the small gestures of courage he had witnessed, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of disaster. He understood that heroism isn't always about medals or recognition. It's about acting when others cannot, about putting others first, and about inspiring hope even in the darkest moments. The senator approached him one last time before leaving. "You've shown courage and humanity in its purest form today," he said. "I hope you realize the impact you've had, not just on the people here, but on everyone who will hear about this." The lorry driver nodded quietly, feeling the weight of the statement. He didn't need to be told. He had acted out of instinct and empathy, and now he could see how one person's actions could ripple outward in ways he never imagined. As the night settled over the highway, the lorry driver climbed back into his truck. His body ached, his mind was tired, but his heart was full. He started the engine, watching the last of the emergency vehicles leave, and began to drive away. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but he felt a quiet confidence. He had faced one of nature's fiercest storms, guided strangers to safety, and remained humble through it all. The world outside the tornado would never forget him, and neither would he. Even in the quiet moments after the chaos, the impact of his actions was clear. Lives had been saved, courage had been witnessed, and hope had been restored. And though he had no desire for fame, the story of his heroism was only beginning to spread. The highway scarred by the tornado would soon be rebuilt, but the mark he left on the people he saved, and the senator who had witnessed it, would endure far longer. The days after the tornado were a blur of news reports, calls from relatives checking in, and quiet reflection for the lorry driver. He had returned to his usual routine, driving his truck along familiar highways, yet everything felt different now. People he passed seemed to look at him with new respect, nodding as he drove by, though he didn't fully understand why. The storm had changed lives, and he realized it had changed his life as well. Word of his actions during the tornado had spread quickly. Families he had rescued had begun sharing their stories on social media, praising the calm and decisive heroism of the lorry driver who had guided them through the chaos. News crews had filmed segments near the highway, recounting how he had moved tirelessly to ensure everyone's safety. They called him a truck driver hero, a simple phrase that captured the extraordinary courage he had shown in a life-threatening situation. But he remained humble. Recognition had never been his goal, and he didn't see himself as special. He had acted because it was the right thing to do. Among the many people grateful for his bravery, the U.S. senator he had helped quietly reached out. The senator invited the lorry driver to a private meeting, wanting to express gratitude personally, and to discuss the importance of his actions. When they met, the senator's demeanor was serious but warm. "What you did during the tornado was remarkable," the senator said. "Not everyone can remain calm under such pressure, and not everyone would risk themselves to help strangers. You've inspired a lot of people." The lorry driver shook his head. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said softly. "I just did what I thought was right. Anyone else would have done the same if they were there." The senator smiled, understanding his humility. "Perhaps, but not everyone does. Today, your actions show the kind of courage that changes lives, and that matters more than anything else." Over the following week, local officials reached out to acknowledge his heroism. He received letters of appreciation from the mayor, the fire department, and the police. Community organizations invited him to speak at schools and events about courage, leadership, and the importance of helping others in emergencies. Each invitation he accepted cautiously, wanting to share lessons learned rather than seek fame. When he spoke to children, he emphasized simple truths: stay calm, help each other, and trust your instincts in critical moments. He wanted them to understand that heroism isn't always about extraordinary strength or wealth. It's about compassion, responsibility, and action. As the story gained national attention, the lorry driver found himself recognized in ways he had never imagined. Journalists interviewed him, capturing the details of his tireless work during the tornado. They highlighted how he had organized survivors, guided the injured, and even inspired strangers to assist in the rescue. Despite the cameras and microphones, he remained grounded, speaking plainly and honestly about what had happened. He never boasted, never sought praise. He only recounted what he had seen and done, focusing on the people who had survived and the hope they carried forward. His family, who had anxiously followed every news update, was overwhelmed with pride. They had always known him as a man of quiet strength, dedicated to his work and loved by those around him. Now the world was seeing it too. But despite the attention, the driver remained true to himself. He continued his deliveries, helping businesses and communities along his route, never allowing recognition to distract him from his responsibilities. The tornado may have changed how others saw him, but it didn't change who he was. One afternoon, the senator invited him to a small ceremony at a local community center. Families rescued during the tornado were present, along with emergency personnel who had assisted in the aftermath. The senator spoke first, recounting the driver's bravery and highlighting the courage and humanity he had shown. "This man saved lives without thinking twice," the senator said. "He acted out of empathy and courage, qualities we need more of in the world. Today we honor him not just for what he did, but for who he is." The lorry driver accepted a simple plaque of appreciation, but more importantly, he saw the gratitude in the eyes of the people he had helped. Children who had been frightened now smiled and waved at him. Parents approached him, offering words of thanks and sharing how much his actions had meant to them. Emergency responders shook his hand, expressing admiration not just for his bravery, but for the calm, steady way he had led during the storm. Each gesture reminded him that what truly mattered was the lives he had touched. After the ceremony, the driver quietly returned to his truck. He spent a few moments alone, reflecting on how ordinary moments can turn extraordinary. He thought back to the morning of the storm, when he had simply climbed into his truck to begin another day of work. He hadn't expected to face a tornado, to rescue strangers, or to meet someone like the senator. Yet all of those moments had revealed something important. Courage and humanity aren't measured by fame or recognition. They are measured by what we do when it counts. In the following weeks, the driver continued to receive messages of gratitude. Local communities shared stories of how they were inspired by his example, how neighbors had helped each other in small but meaningful ways, and how people were thinking differently about courage and empathy. The lorry driver smiled quietly whenever he read these stories. He had never sought to inspire anyone, He had only acted, but he realized that one act of courage could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not imagine. Despite all the attention, he remained humble. He continued driving his routes, delivering goods, and helping communities along the way. He made small gestures of kindness wherever he went, assisting someone stuck with a flat tire, offering water to a stranded traveler, or simply offering a kind word to someone having a difficult day. To him, these actions were no different than what he had done during the tornado. Courage and compassion, he understood, were daily choices, not just moments of crisis. The senator maintained contact, checking in and offering support, but also encouraging him to continue his humble, steady approach to life. "Your story isn't just about the tornado," the senator said one day. "It's about how one person's actions can shape the world around them. You've shown that true leadership comes from helping others without expectation, and that's a lesson everyone needs to see." The lorry driver nodded, understanding that the storm had changed more than the landscape. It had changed the way people saw what courage could look like in ordinary life. Months later, the highway where the tornado had struck had been repaired, and life had begun returning to normal. The lorry driver continued his deliveries, but he carried with him a quiet sense of pride and purpose. He had faced one of nature's fiercest storms, saved lives without hesitation, and inspired people across his community and beyond. Yet he remained grounded, knowing that true heroism was not about accolades. It was about doing what is right, even when no one is watching. Even as national recognition continued, the driver stayed humble. He spoke at schools and community events, sharing lessons from the tornado without exaggeration or self-promotion. He encouraged children and adults alike to be prepared, to help each other, and to act with courage when circumstances demanded it. His message was simple, relatable, and deeply human. Bravery is not about superpowers or fame. It is about empathy, responsibility, and action. The families he had saved continued to share their gratitude, and some formed lasting friendships with the driver. They invited him to community gatherings, celebrated milestones, and always remembered his quiet heroism. In turn, the driver found joy not in recognition, but in connection, the understanding that his actions had created bonds that would last far beyond the storm. One evening, as he drove his truck along a quiet stretch of highway, he reflected on the journey. The tornado had tested him in ways he had never imagined. It had forced him to confront danger, uncertainty, and fear. But in doing so, it had also revealed the strength of his character, the depth of his empathy, and the power of simple, courageous action. He realized that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences, and that heroism often comes in quiet, selfless ways. The lorry driver's life had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. He was recognized not for his ambition, wealth, or status, but for his humanity. He had inspired others to act with courage and compassion, and he had left a lasting mark on the community, the families he rescued, and even the senator who had witnessed his actions firsthand. Yet through it all, he remained the same man, humble, hardworking, and dedicated to helping others whenever he could. And so, life continued. The highways stretched out before him, familiar and yet forever changed by the events of that day. He drove with the quiet knowledge that what he had done mattered, not just for the people he had saved, but for the countless lives his example had touched. Courage, empathy, and humanity. These were the true measures of a hero. And in that, the lorry driver had become one, not by seeking recognition, but by acting with heart when it mattered most.